and we backed up at a spur. At last, we uncoupled at a hamlet called Parham. We had reached our operational base. It was known as Framingham, the name of the largest village in the area, where we were assigned to the 571st Squadron of the 390th Bomb Group in the 13th Combat Wing in the 3rd Air Division in the 8th Air Force. After 11 days of hard travel by train, bus, train, ship, GI truck, we had reached our operational base. On D-Day. The long-awaited D-Day dawned gray and misty with a fine drizzle falling at our Framingham base. I was brushing my teeth at about 08:30 when Jim Atkinson rushed in and first gave the word about the invasion. But throughout the day, the word was vague. Although we huddled over the radio throughout the morning, the news we received wasn't too reliable. Everyone expressed concern about the miserable weather and what effect this would have on our air support of the troops on the beaches. Just after lunch, around 1300 hours, we were briefed for bombing a railroad checkpoint at Falaise, only a few miles behind across the lines. A mission had been flown to the Falaise area in the morning, but it did not drop because of the weather. When we were dropping in the same area as our troops were in, we had limitations about dropping big bombs from a high altitude. Our target in the afternoon was a railroad choke point of Falaise, only a few kilometers from Beachhead. We were loaded with 6 1,000-pounders, with one bomb carried externally under each wing. We only had 1,700 gallons of fuel to make allowance for the extra ton of bombs we carried for the short distance. We assembled at 16,000 feet, according to the briefing. Mission into the mist, and while climbing for assembly, we found our radio compass was out. Further, the aircraft had no G-box, a short-range primitive radar. We were still spiraling upwards, not too certain of our location in the mist, along with a couple thousand other aimlessly wandering planes, when the VHF radio crackled the news that we were to assemble at 12,000 feet, not 16,000 feet. There probably was a clearing at 12,000 feet, but we missed it. Kept climbing in the mist until we finally broke out of the soup at 23,000 feet, and all alone, among our group at least. The gray sky was full of planes looking for their formations, like big black flies around a syrup bottle. Several groups could be seen circling and forming, but their flares wouldn't be recognized because the flares disappeared into the mist as soon as they were 5 or 10 feet from the plane. We flew from group to group looking for the letter J on the large tail fin, but the search was futile. We were afraid to just tack on to anybody because unless they had external bombs, they might have a big fuel load, which would have to leave us if they were heading very deep into Germany, and we had no fuel. We'd been taught that the crew that flies alone often dies alone. We worked our way steadily southward while vainly hunting for the 390th until the mist gradually thinned out. At last, we were obviously alone, and I looked far below, clear down to the coastline, although through a hole in the undercast. I saw what, according to my calculation, was the port of Dover. I called Gal on the interphone and told him what I saw. We returned to Framingham alone and disheartened after boarding from what was to have been our first mission. Gal made a great landing with the external bombs weighing down each wing. Our opening day had been miserable. Naturally, we did not get credit for a mission. 2nd, 1944. The target was an oil storage pump at Saint-Denis on a loop in the Seine in the northern section of Paris. The bomb load was 2,250 pounders to be dropped from 25,000 feet. We hit the French coast at Cabourg at the eastern end of the beachhead. From Cabourg, we flew a southeasterly course to La Loupe, about 10 miles from Chartres. From La Loupe, we flew eastward to Nogent, to Villers-Cotterêts, RIP. After bombing, we proceeded to Fontenay over the heart of Paris and danced back over La Loupe and l'Aigle, leaving the continent between Saint-Valery and Dieppe. Bombing results were good again, in spite of a high thin cirrus cloud and a heavy industrial haze over the target. A 20,000-foot column of smoke was clearly visible as it rose from the remains of what had been the fuel dump at Saint-Denis. Even as we left the coast, this pillar of smoke was a dominant feature on the horizon. The weather in the Paris area was ideal for enemy interception, for the cirrus at our altitude combined with the general gloom provided a perfect screen for the Germans. Sure enough, as we turned over our IP about 10 minutes before the brief target time, radio reported bandits in the area. Shortly after, while on a bomb run, I spotted a single Nazi flying at about 20,000 feet in the opposite direction. However, as far as we were concerned, that was the end of the fighter threat in the afternoon. Our troubles were not to be from fighters over Paris. About a minute before target time, the flak began bursting dangerously near, but the formation was tight and compact of bombs away. By then, the sky was black with flak, but as we turned to the left, over the center of the city, toward the rally point, a solid wall of flak loomed dead ahead. For the first time in combat, I could see reddish flashes, alarmingly close by. It was about a minute after release I heard Miner's voice crackle over the interphone, exclaiming, "There's been a man hit back here." Almost at the same instant, flak burst in the nose compartment, spraying glass all over Atkins and me, knocking both of us in the nose to the floor. Jim's neck was cut a little, and I remember seeing the flak slicing through the torsion spring of the left cheek gun. I recovered my senses enough to hastily administer a little sulfa powder on Atkinson's neck. He wasn't seriously hurt at all, so he rushed back to see what he could do, since he was the first aid officer of the crew. Bob Kincaid was sprawled on the icy floor. The flak had hit Bob, and he was wounded in the back, roughly in the kidney area. Flak had hit twice, both in the kidneys, but he had gone to the floor immediately, where he remained in spite of his attempts to rise. Giving first aid at altitude is certainly no easy task, since only a few minutes without oxygen will cause anyone wounded or with nothing wrong to lose consciousness or even die from anoxia. In spite of everything the crew could do, Bob lapsed into a coma and lost his pulse about the same time we crossed the coast. I think Bob Kincaid died about the time we were first over the channel. At the base, the sky was full of flares. A red flare shot while planes were over the field indicated to medical or emergency personnel that there were wounded aboard or there was at least an emergency. At the end of the runway were 8 or 10 fortresses waiting for the ambulances to send the casualties to the hospital. 571st Squadron was out of action for the next 3 days. That was a hard way to get a rest. At interrogation, we learned that one ME-109 had been shot down by Fairchuck's tail gunner. However, there had been a price. Fairchuck had landed on a southern England strip on his last operating engine. His tail gunner was killed, his radioman had lost a leg, and the waist gunner was severely wounded. After interrogation, we met Major Zellner, the group flight surgeon, and he commended the crew for their first aid efforts. But Bob Kincaid had suffered a hemorrhage as soon as he would hit was beyond any hope for anyone. He was to be buried at the American Cemetery near Cambridge. This is undoubtedly the flackiest mission along with our second Stuttgart. We were given a pass to London's Cumberland Hotel while our plane was getting the lube job or something. When we returned from the Cumberland, Jim Atkinson told us that he was through with flying. He went to a couple of doctors in London for his nerves, but he's permanently grounded, and of course he left the crew. Then Vingo went back to the States and was replaced by Moore. For the rest of our tour, we flew with transit tail gunners and waist gunners. We never really replaced our tail and waist gunners on a regular basis, but we made do. We also had a new bombardier, a fellow named Charlie Mays. We later settled for another bombardier, Vic Estes, but that is another story. Mission, July 7th, 1944. This is my longest day. Of the 25 missions I flew, 3 were much more eventful and distasteful than the rest. Although this Meersburg mission may not have had the flak concentration of Paris or Stuttgart, it was undoubtedly the most miserable day of any of my missions and hopefully of my life as well. From the summer of 1944 to the end of the war, the Leipzig area was by far the most heavily defended target of the continent. Although I always believe we all have different worst targets. Whichever target was more miscellaneous or extraneous Whichever target had more miscellaneous and extraneous bad luck associated with your raids was your worst target, no matter how many guns were there. At the time of my visits, there were about 1,000 heavy guns above 88 millimeter at Mercersburg alone. The main reason for such a concentration of firepower was oil, mainly synthetic, although the natural fields such as Vienna and Ploiești were not to be discounted by any means. The 8th Bomber Command dispatched over 1,100 heavies on the 7th of July to bomb the oil targets in the Leipzig area. Our bomb wing, 54 bombers, was briefed to hit the plant at Mercersburg, about 10 miles west of the city of Leipzig. We crossed the enemy coastline at Egmont, then easterly over the Zuider Zee, then Doomer, Celle, Salzwedel, and Stendal. Then we turned southward to Torgau, RIP. There, after bombs away, we flew to Naumburg, the rally point. Then we flew directly back to Doomer and took the reciprocal back to Framingham. En route, we encountered vicious prop wash, turbulent air, over the Zuider Zee, and although we at first thought the condition was caused by our passage, post-war report of the 8th missions revealed that the turbulence had not been from our own plane, but was due to a bloody battle a few minutes earlier, in which an entire squadron of B-24s had been shot down. We too were affected by the rough air, and we lost 1,500 feet of altitude, and naturally our group was all over the sky. But worse yet, 2 bombers from our group had a mid-air collision, and more personally, one of these 2 was with our hut mates, Larry Gregory's crew. We also knew Smith, the other pilot. In the 8th at the time, the officers of the 2 crews roomed in one hut, while the gunners of the same crew shared the hut next door. Although there was one survivor, and workers set out the rest of the war as a POW, the co-pilot of Gregor's crew, nobody survived the collision was from Smith's crew. Naturally, we could scarcely believe our eyes. 19 dead in a second. About 4 or 5 minutes later, we had more or less regained some kind of formation when we lost power in our number 1 engine. We again fell out of formation. By the time we were over Doomerzee, we were lagging more and more behind and joining group after group, only to fall behind again. Within 15 or 20 minutes, we were no longer thinking about the collision. We now had a brand new problem. We lagged back in the Palmer stream time and again, only to fall behind once more. We cut inside the brief turn again, but it was once again the same old story. To remain alone was simply begging for a fighter attack. We latched onto a Triangle G group, but once they opened their bomb doors, we opened ours too, and we couldn't keep in formation, so we dropped behind again over Bowen. We turned the corner and joined yet another group. It was a 447th, Square K. And to our amazement, they too bombed our brief target. After we finally dropped our bombs, we actually were able to keep up. The skies over Leipzig were congested on that day, and the flak was intense over Leipzig. Off to our left, we could see the Triangle G8 in heavy flak, but we had our own problem too. And although we didn't suffer from too many hits, one fragment came under the toggler's armpit and hit me in the shoulder. But could you believe it? All I received was a slight wound and the fright of my life. Between my flak suit and the spent velocity of the fragment, all I actually felt was a solid thump. That's Irish luck, plus the will of God. Although the average bomb run was maybe 7 or 8 minutes, we had a fantastic 19-minute bomb run that day, thanks to bombing upwind and wandering all over the area. Through the entire mission, I was half sick with a touch of dysentery. The gas pains were aggravated by the low pressure of altitude, and there were times that I really didn't feel much like navigating. The formation we flew home in was a mongrel outfit with feathered props and shredded control surfaces. There were 5 different groups shown by different tail letters.